Welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast series, where we address challenges and ideas for early stage and entrepreneurial business leaders. Your host today is Dave Coffaro, Interim President and CEO of the Greater Irvine Chamber.
Well, welcome, folks, to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast. And, in the nonprofit world, there's a saying that says, with no money, there is no mission. And I think we can extrapolate from that concept to cash flow and say, with no cash flow, nothing flows in business. Cash management is really the lifeline for any kind of business. And even if a business shows a profit on paper, if cash flow is negative, more money is going out than is coming in, bills don't get paid and opportunities get missed. So strong cash flow management enables businesses to plan effectively, avoid different kinds of financial strain and struggle, and really make better strategic decisions for growth. It sounds so simple, right? No, or maybe not. Our guest today is a business cash flow expert and is here to help us to make sense of this topic and share his thoughts on how to elevate your cash management acumen. Tom Hammond is a senior associate with the firm of CliftonLarsonAllen and specializes in financial modeling and forecasting. So, Tom, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited.
All right, so let's jump right into the questions. Let's start with, what is cash flow management and why is it so critical for small and early stage businesses?
Yeah, so when I think of cash flow management, I think it's a threefold way that we can look at this. So first, I would say it's understanding your cash flow. So that's a basics. It's your cash receipts minus your cash expenses. It doesn't, like Dave mentioned, it's not truly your bottom line, but it's understanding that cash flow. So what's coming in the door versus what's coming out. You need to understand your revenue streams and understand your customers and knowing what cash expenses you have. Both, consider both your operating expenses as well as those capital expenses, or even loan payments are another one. The second part of this, after you understand it, is just tracking that cash flow. That's what I love to help a lot of my clients with, is just ultimately it involves having a reliable forecast or understanding the data that you have at your disposal already. Then the last part of this is analyzing and optimizing that cash flow. So the first two steps of this, understanding and tracking, that can help businesses and business owners identify where cash flow optimization can occur. I'll give a couple examples of that later on. But ultimately, just managing your cash flow is so critical, especially for small businesses or early stage businesses, because it helps them maintain enough cash to pay their employees, pay their suppliers, and then even invest in future growth opportunities.
So that kind of leads to the question, Tom, why is it so difficult to think in terms of cash flow? Because, like, you think about a lot of business owners, we look at a P&L, but a P&L really doesn't tell us anything about the speed of cash coming in, the speed of cash going out, and things like that. Why is it so difficult to sort of get that message through to us as business operators?
It's easy for me to say this from my bias of growing up in a finance sort of job, but once you understand the cash flow statement, it helps it become so much clearer for somebody who's just looking at their data. But a lot of times, like you mentioned, Dave, if you just look at the P&L, it could tell a different story than what's really happening with your cash. So if you're just looking at sales or net revenue, that doesn't necessarily mean that's cash coming in the door. You're going to have a number of customers, often with different with different terms of how you're getting those cash receipts. So that's why, again, coming from a finance perspective, you're able to understand sort of the balance sheet, the working capital relationship with that shows up on your cash flow statement. So it's the timing of your receiving your accounts receivable or getting those cash receipts. It's the timing of paying your vendors or suppliers. Those are all things you can't see necessarily from your P&L. Another aspect of the P&L is you have depreciation on there, which throws things off, and that's a non-cash expense, and that's something you don't really need to consider as far as understanding your cash flow.
So that kind of sets us up to say, given your experience, given your work, given your background, what are some of the common mistakes that you see that small or early stage businesses, entrepreneurial businesses make when it comes to cash flow management? And how can people avoid those things?
So I would say the two most common mistakes I tend to see is one, failing to have a cash reserve. Um, so this could be some sort of emergency fund or just a small amount of money to keep on hand. It's helpful. It's not always feasible, especially with smaller businesses. Um, an alternative to that cash reserve is securing like a line of credit if it's possible. So line of credits allow businesses to have flexibility with a lender so the business can draw on those funds when necessary. Obviously, this comes with interest expense on what you're borrowing. The bank may have other stipulations, such as a borrowing base calculation. So you're going to have to maintain what you're borrowing within this borrowing base. You might have to do periodic reporting, such as giving forecasts or providing historical statements or aging reports. All that to say, it's important to have a source of cash to rely on. The other big mistake that I would see is failing to forecast, so not looking ahead enough. So a forecast can be crucial in helping plan for a business's future. A forecast can help identify periods where cash may be thin due to the timing of expected cash receipts versus cash expenditures. Then a forecast can help show potential areas for improvement or growth within the business or abilities to sort of grow your cash flows or optimize your cash flows, I would say. One other sometimes one other mistake I sometimes see is, especially with these small businesses or sole owners who might not have a fully developed finance and accounting department, is they can often combine personal finances with their business finances. I've recently had a client who was a sole owner of a manufacturing company who was doing this, and so the building that his team worked out of, he owned the building, and he didn't separate personal expenses from company expenses. Long story short, it got kind of complicated, and he didn't have a great relationship with his lenders, and part of that was because of that lack of separation with his finances. He ended up pretty tight on cash. He had to lay off some staff. He stopped paying himself a salary. All of those just kind of emphasize the importance of keeping those finances distinct to just maintain clear cash flow management, or just understand what your business is doing on the cash flow side.
When I think about a lot of our companies that are members of the chamber, we've got a lot of small, mid-sized, large companies, but especially with small businesses, it's kind of hard to draw a line of distinction between where the company's financial life begins and ends and where the proprietor's business life ends and begins. And so I think that's a really good point. Drawing those lines of demarcation as clearly as possible, it just helps things stay cleaner. It helps you avoid challenges further down the road, whether it's with the bank or an auditor or something like that. Really good counsel to keep those separate. You mentioned a line of credit, and as a former banker, I'll just add to that, especially for businesses that are cyclical or have lumpy cash flow, to have something, and especially to apply for the line of credit when you don't necessarily need it. Because I'm just projecting my own experience as a banker, but it's this weird thing that banks tend to be more comfortable lending when people don't really need it. So secure the line of credit when it's not dire straits, or when you've got great receivables and nothing coming in and you got to pay salary. That's probably not the best time to do it. So really good points there. how can you talked a little bit about forecasting, and so how can businesses be as accurate as possible in forecasting their cash flow needs?
Yeah, I love this question. It's one that I face often as I'm doing proposals to help clients with their cash flow or just forecasts in general. Um, the first thing to keep in the back of your mind is forecasts will obviously they'll never be 100% accurate. That's the nature of a forecast. But that doesn't mean you can't make beneficial forecasts that will help the business plan for the future. I think the best way to answer your question of how to accurately do this is, again, taking into consideration the cash flow statement itself. So if you don't mind, I'll quickly walk through sort of the three parts of your common cash flow statement. So the
Yeah.
first is your operating cash flows. So when I look at that, it's starting with the bottom line of your P&L. Um, Again, like we mentioned, that doesn't really account for working capital. So the timing of your payables, the timing of your receivables, timing of your inventory purchases. So first, it's just understanding that cash flows from operations. Be aware of your fixed costs, your variable costs that happen month to month, and just get an understanding of a baseline of your operations. So that's the first step when I build a cash flow is work with a client or when I build a forecast is work with a client to understand what that clear baseline is. And part of it's looking at our aging reports, looking at our customers, just to like I said, establish what that baseline is. The next piece of this is your um, I'm sorry, it's your investing cash flows. So when I look at that, I think of your purchases of often for like property, plant, and equipment is a very common one. So it's looking ahead. Okay, if my company is growing, do I need to buy more space? If I have a building under that I own, do I need to add to it or renovate? Um, is there equipment that I need to buy? Do I need IT support or infrastructure for my business? That's what I think of when I think of investing up activities. There's definitely more that you could add to that list. Um, but next, I would say let's look at the financing side. So we kind of talked about the line of credit, um, but there could be debt like a traditional loan, which is a lot, I would say, simpler to forecast that. So you'll know if you have a loan, you'll know when those payments are because the bank will be certain that you know. Whereas with a line of credit, like we mentioned, there's sort of that flexibility with withdrawing and paying back on that line.
So all of that distills into being more accurate. So just a tip or two on how small businesses can improve their cash flow forecasting. What are some of the best things that businesses can do to be more accurate?
Yeah. So looking at your past is a great place to start. So, and this can be challenging if you don't have good internal reporting, which can be the case with very early stage businesses. But if you can look at your past and see, okay, we know customer A is going to take 90 days to pay us, and we know customer A gives us 40% of our sales, we'll know that 40% of our sales we're not going to get cash on for 90 days. So it's taking a look at your customers. The opposite side, taking a look at your vendors or your suppliers, understand the relationships with everybody involved. So that'd be one tip, looking at your past to see how those relationships are. Another tip would be talking to an advisor. Um, those who may not be very well versed in a finance perspective or might not have a lot of experience with numbers, talking to an advisor who works with this constantly can help just give insights, things to look for, things to plan for, and can even help you build a forecast.
Yeah, I think getting professional input is a really valuable idea, especially since so many entrepreneurs didn't go into their specialization because they were great at finance and cash flow management. They were great at building something or designing something or creating something or consulting or whatever. And so it just makes sense to find somebody who is a subject matter expert. In our community, as you know, we've got a lot of early stage startup companies, and in particular in the startup world, there's this concept of burn rate.
Hmm.
What is it? What does it mean? And is it significant?
Burn rate is a critical metric for startups and small businesses. It measures the speed at which a company is depleting its cash reserves without having a positive cash flow from its operations. Um, Essentially, it's a key indicator of your financial health, and tells us essentially how much time the company has left to either become profitable or secure additional financing. Um, so, for example, let's think of a made-up company here, let's call it Techie Toys, and they make gadgets for kids or little toys for kids. Um, Say they have an initial investment round where they get $500,000. If they're spending in these early stages, say $50,000 a month on marketing, product development, salaries, rent, say if they're spending $50,000 a month without making any sales yet, their burn rate would be $50,000 per month. Ultimately, we can use that to calculate the company's runway, is what we call it. The runway is the amount of time the company continued to operate at that burn rate. So 500,000 or $500,000 divided by that 50,000 is essentially saying, okay, at this pace, you have 10 months left to either begin generating income or positive cash flows, or find new funding, whether equity or debt.
Yeah, and that's so wise if you work backwards from that. If you know it's 10 months out, then the management question you can distill that into is, what's the probability that we're going to be generating revenue from our product or our service in month 7, 8, and 9 that can
Mm-hmm.
turn into cash in
Yeah.
month 10, so we keep the boat afloat. So really, really good advice. What are some of the common cash flow challenges that you see small businesses face?
The most common is working with people outside your organization, so your customers or your vendors. Um, Typically, the most common I would say is late payments from your customers, especially if you don't have an established relationship. If that example I mentioned earlier with the gentleman who was mixing finances with his personal finances, he had an account with a pretty large distribution company, and it was a huge opportunity for him. It would essentially come close to doubling his sales, and that's what he took that opportunity. But he didn't realize it would take 120 days to receive cash from these guys. Um, and so if he's spending money to get inventory to give to this distribution center, he's spending more money than he's bringing in. So that's a huge or a common problem, is these late payments, and we'll talk a little bit of how we can improve that in a moment. But another problem is, we mentioned this earlier, it's just seasonality or cyclical sales. So Christmas time, maybe some companies have higher sales, whereas in the rest of the year, maybe they don't. Um, a last example would be unexpected expenses. So repair costs, or you realize you need additional space as you're growing and you didn't plan for that appropriately. Those unexpected costs can be a common cash flow challenge.
Thinking about it from the operating the business perspective too, on that late payment topic, and in the example that you gave, there's a cost to that. It costs your business money, real money, to maintain that. So especially if you're using a line of credit or something else, you've got that finance cost, but you've also foregone whatever time period that is using your own money to essentially become a lender to your client. So your accounts receivable, you're financing them yourself. that puts a lot more pressure. So important that all those elements come into the way you think through your cash management. What strategies can businesses put into place to improve their cash flow?
So speaking about that customer relationship, offering early payment discounts is a common way that can incentivize quicker payments and obviously improve cash flow. Another way is optimizing your inventory management so you can prevent excess capital from being tied up in unsold stock or inventory. Um, Part of this is being able to analyze your sales data and your customer demand. So again, it sometimes can be difficult for smaller businesses if they don't have the right technology to do so. But again, that's where advisors can come in and help, and they can offer support on that end, or even suggest good software to help with that. Another tactic on the payable side is negotiating payment terms with suppliers. If you're able to extend payment deadlines, even by 5 or 10 days on average, could be a huge help while you're waiting for customer receipts to come in. Lastly, there's um, what's called invoice financing. It's a unique option where you can go to a lender and allow these businesses to borrow money against the amounts due from customers, which would provide immediate liquidity. The problem with this is there's financing costs or fees associated with that, so it's not necessarily recommended compared to other routes, but it's another option for small businesses to get that immediate cash up front.
You just touched on an example a minute ago about a customer of one of your clients that had 40% of their business with one of their customers. So that sort of brings up the question about the importance of diversifying revenue. What are some of the ways that businesses can diversify their revenue to help with cash flow stability and also sort of protection?
So the protection that comes with that diversification is that it smooths out, the peaks and valleys of cash flow. So now that you have these multiple income streams, you're no longer relying on a single source or a couple sources of revenue. That especially can be risky if that source fails. So that client who had 40% tied up with one customer, say that relationship ends, and now you've lost 40% of your sales. Um, it can be a huge problem. So diversifying is important. It's a challenge as you're growing, but look for those opportunities and network and find people that you can meet and find opportunities to market and advertise your service or your product. Again, but just different revenue streams, they tend to produce different working capital days, so different collection times from your customers, even possibly different vendor payments based on what sort of products. If you're a product-based company, diversification can definitely help.
Sounds like it's really worthwhile to look at how you have concentrations so that you mitigate those risks. So let's talk about debt financing and how does that affect a company's cash flow?
Yeah, we've spoke a good amount about this. Just to reemphasize, the debt financing can provide a cash influx. So especially if you're getting a loan up front, or even with a line of credit as you're making draws on that line. The problem is it creates an obligation to either make regular payments with a loan or semi or regular. It could be flexible with your line of credit based on the terms, but all of those payments can strain cash flow, especially with the interest on those and high interest rates that we're seeing right now. So it's important to structure debt in a way that aligns with your company's cash flow patterns. You could even talk to multiple lenders as you're trying to secure that financing, just to see if there's different options out there. Maybe one lender won't offer you a line of credit, but maybe another would. So it's just important to just kind of understand the importance of debt, the obligations that come with it and how it impacts your cash flow.
When we think about debt that's used to finance, to basically be working capital versus long-term investment, that sort of leads to the question of how do you find that right balance between growth in your business and investments in the business, along with the need for positive cash flow. So where's that balance point?
Yeah, it's very hard. Everybody is unique and every situation is unique, but the importance is to balance that growth and the cash flow, and that involves careful planning and then prioritization of investments that offer the best return. And best return might not necessarily mean the biggest new customer. It could mean you have a customer who can pay you quickly. And it is a balance, something you have to consider as you're going through this. I fall back on saying a forecast is so important, because if you're able to quickly throw a new opportunity into a financial model or a forecast and say, okay, we know we have an opportunity to work with a new customer and they'll give us X number of dollars in revenue or margin, but it's going to take X number of days to get paid. Being able to throw that situation into a forecast to see how it coincides with your existing operations is a very valuable tool. It's important to be able to just see that and at least plan for it. All ultimately to help get to that balance. And again, it's unique for everybody what that exact place is. A couple other things to just keep in mind with opportunity is there additional capital expenses? So do you need additional equipment or space to handle a new opportunity? Are your margins going to be affected at all? Will other service lines or other customers be impacted by a new opportunity? Those are just some common ones you need to think about as a business owner or somebody making these decisions.
So Tom, all those elements that you just talked about kind of aggregate up into strategic thinking and strategic decisions. How can companies use cash flow forecasting to make better strategic decisions?
So Dave, I would say cash flow forecasting provides insights into when a business might have that excess cash that's available for these decisions or these investments, or giving you knowledge about when you might face a shortfall on cash. So all of that information is just crucial for making informed decisions about, say, expansion or hiring people or any strategic move that you're considering.
We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of elements of cash flow management. What are some of the common misconceptions that you hear about in this arena, and how can businesses avoid kind of falling into those traps?
Yeah, so I think this is a good question that we've been hitting all points from all angles here, but fall back onto what we said at the beginning of this is most common is the misconception that profitability equates to good cash flow. So a business can be profitable on paper, but like we said, it could still struggle with cash flow. So to avoid that trap, businesses should focus on the timing of cash flows, not just the amounts that they see on their P&L.
And if we pull all of this together, you've talked about reporting, the importance of being able to have line of sight and good information. That leads to tools and technology. So how can businesses use technology to improve their cash flow?
So technology can automate invoicing, track your expenses in real time, provide predictive analytics for decision making. There's so many things that technology can do, and now with artificial intelligence, that can help automate a lot of your tasks and free up other resources, whether that's people's time or money. I think of CLA. I heard this from somebody else I work with, is that we just encountered a client who was spending 40 hours a week on on AP, just processing AP invoices. So they had essentially a full-time individual just going through emails, putting it on checks, doing this whole process. And we were able to help them find an artificial intelligence solution that cut it down to essentially 40 minutes of user time in a week. So
wow,
we're just starting to see this point where AI is really helping businesses. I'm happy to be working at CLA, where we've taken a big investment into using AI to help our clients. So that's just one aspect of technology. My love is Excel, and like I said, I do financial modeling, and so having a financial model that's quick to just test scenarios or easy to update for the future, because your forecast can update. I mean, every day you know more about the future. So having a forecast or a tool to help you plan is important. And also just having good software. So whether that's on the finance side or inventory side, there's dozens of things that you can do. And talking to, say, again, a consultant or somebody who can just help point you in the right direction of tools that can help your business, can ultimately help you with decision making. And then back to the topic, it just can improve your cash flow management.
So I'm blown away by the fact that you had a client whose accounts payable, they ended up saving 39 hours and 20 minutes, if my math is right, by using the tool. That means they've got that much more capacity to do something meaningful, which is hopefully leading to generating more revenue for the company. That is worth the price of admission. So we're just about to the close of today's session. So that leads to my final question, and it's this. What one piece of advice would you most like our listeners to take away from this podcast, Tom?
I would say if you don't have one already, make it a goal to develop a cash flow forecast. If you do have one, I commonly see people not really using it as frequently as they could. You don't need to look at it every day, but do a regular review and update. This could be every couple of months, every couple of weeks, or quarterly. There isn't a perfect, there's not a right answer for every client, but having a forecast that you can just rely on and help you just plan ahead and think ahead. We like to say success is found in planning, and or planning can help with success, and the cash flow forecast can certainly help with that. And not having one is a problem, in my opinion. But getting one is super helpful. It can be eye-opening even. So that's my biggest advice. I'll leave it at that.
It reminds me of the Alice in Wonderland and the Cheshire Cat, who said, if you don't have a plan, any path will get you there. This is exactly the opposite of that. So what a perfect note to end on, Tom. Thank you so much for sharing these insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Dave.
All right, folks, thanks for joining. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us for the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast. To stay informed about upcoming podcasts and other important business news, please subscribe to our channel or check the Greater Irvine Chamber website.